The carriage left her at the foot of the steps, and the great door of Hartfell Court opened before she had decided whether to knock. A footman took her trunk without a word. She followed him into a hall the size of a chapel, and there, beneath a window 2 stories high, a small boy stood very still before a painting, looking up at it with his hands folded behind his back, like a magistrate. She had walked into that hall meaning to be no one. She had spent 3 days on the road practicing the flatness of her new voice, the steadiness of a woman called Miss Brooke, who had no people and no past, and wanted only £30 a year and a room above the nursery. She had a letter sewn into the lining of her trunk that could end a man, and she had promised herself she would never take it out. She had come to disappear. Then the boy turned and looked at her and looked back at the painting and said, in the clear carrying voice of a child who has not yet learned that some questions are weapons, "That lady has your eyes." Marianne did not look at the painting. She knew what was in it. She had sat for it 11 years before, 18 years old and certain of everything, in a gown the color of a summer sky, with one hand resting on a book she had never finished reading. She had not known the portrait still hung. She had not known, when she answered the advertisement, whose house this was. The agency had written only Hartfell Court, in Derbyshire, a widowed gentleman, 1 son. Governess required, references not essential, apply at once. She had been hungry enough that references not essential was the only line that mattered. "I am sure I don't know what you mean," she said. Her voice held. She was proud of that, later, when she remembered it. "You do," the boy said, not unkindly. "Look." She did not look. A door opened at the far end of the hall, and a man came through it, and she heard him before the candlelight reached his face. That low, unhurried voice. A voice she had once known the weather of, every change in it. "Henry," he said, "you are meant to be at your lessons, not interrogating the staff." And then he stopped, 3 yards off, and the years stopped with him. He had grown harder. The softness she remembered at the corners of his mouth had been planed away, and there was grey at his temple that had not been there when he was 25 and laughing. His eyes were the same, so dark a brown they went near to black by candlelight, and they moved over her face the way a man's hand moves over a wound he had thought long healed, testing whether it still gave pain. It did. "This is the new governess," the boy offered. "Miss Brooke. She has the eyes from the picture." "Does she?" said the Duke of Hartfell. He did not say her name. She understood, in that suspended second, that he had not placed her. That grief and 11 years and the dimness of the hall had given her a moment's grace, and that she could still be Miss Brooke if she only kept her chin down and her mouth shut. "Welcome to Hartfell, Miss Brooke," he said. "Mrs. Pell will show you up." "Henry. Lessons." He turned and was gone, and she breathed for what felt like the first time since Derby. But she had seen his hand as he turned. He had pressed his thumb once, hard, against the signet ring on his other hand. A thing he did, she remembered, only when he was holding something down by force. He had not placed her. But some animal part of him had begun to ask the question. And that part of him never let a question go. What no one in that hall knew, not the boy, not the Duke, not Mrs. Pell coming down the stairs with her keys chiming, was that the woman who had betrayed Julian Severn 11 years ago had never betrayed him at all, and the proof of it was sewn into a trunk now being carried up the servants' stair. The nursery was warm, which surprised her. She had braced for a cold house and found a cold master in a house full of fires, as if he kept the rooms warm for a wife no longer there to feel them. Mrs. Pell, the housekeeper, was 60 and missed nothing. "His Grace does not come to the nursery," she said, laying out the schedule. The late Duchess made it her whole world, God rest her, and he has not crossed the threshold since she died. 3 years now. You'll deal with me, not him. That suits most. It suits me, Marianne said. We'll see if it suits the boy. Mrs. Pell paused at the door. He's clever and lonely and says exactly what he sees. The last 2 governesses could not bear it. If you mean to stay, don't lie to him. He always knows. Marianne, who had come to that house built entirely of one enormous lie, said that she would try. She did not sleep. She lay in the narrow bed above the nursery and thought about the letter in the lining of her trunk, Reginald Crane's letter, in his own black sprawling hand, sealed with his own signet, written 3 days before the scandal that destroyed her. You will be my wife by Michaelmas, or you will be no one's wife at all. I have the means to make certain of it, Marianne. Do not try me. She had kept it 11 years, through every degree of poverty, when selling it might have bought her bread, because it was the only thing on this earth that said she had not done what they all swore she had done. There had never been anyone who would believe her over a baronet, least of all the one man whose word might have lifted her out of the mud, who had stood in a ballroom 11 years ago and let his father break their betrothal without once asking whether the letter they waved in her face was true. She had hated him for that, longer than she had loved him. It had taken less time than she expected to discover that the two were the same length exactly. In the days that followed, she learned the shape of the house and the shape of the boy, and the boy was the easier of the two. Henry was 7 and grave and starved for someone to be interested in him, and Marianne, who had spent 11 years being interested in no one in order to survive, found the discipline cracking the first afternoon he showed her a beetle in a matchbox and explained its legs with total seriousness. She had not laughed in a long while. She did then, and he looked up sharply, as if he had caught something rare in a net, and from that hour he was hers. It was Henry who took her back to the portrait, a week in, on a grey afternoon, planting himself before it again. There, he said. Now look. You wouldn't, before. This time she looked, because to refuse twice would say more than to look once. There she was at 18, blue-gowned, one hand on the unfinished book, her chin tipped at an angle she still felt herself make in mirrors. Some unkind, accurate painter had got the exact set of her mouth, the way she looked at a thing she did not yet distrust. Below the frame was a small brass plate, with no name on it, and the brighter rectangle where the old plate had been unscrewed away. Who is she? Henry asked. I don't know, Marianne said, and Mrs. Pell's warning went through her like cold water, he always knows. And the boy looked at her a long moment with his clever, lonely face, and decided, visibly, to let her have the lie. It was a gift. She did not deserve it. She took it. That was the afternoon the Duke found them. She heard the signet ring before she heard the voice, that single hard press of thumb to gold, and turned, and he was in the doorway, looking not at his son, and not at the painting, but at her, at the living face beside the painted one, and she watched him do the arithmetic at last. She saw the exact instant the sum came out. His face did not change. That was the most frightening thing about him. He could take a mortal blow, and his face would only go still, the way the surface of deep water goes still over the place where something has just gone down. Henry, he said, without looking away from her. Go to Mrs. Pell. The boy went. The hall emptied. The two of them stood 11 feet apart, with 11 years between them and a painting of a girl who had believed the world was kind, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing to say that would not be too large for the room. Take it down then, she said at last. Her voice came out steadier than she was. You found me out. Have me put in the road tonight, Your Grace, and take her down, and we needn't either of us pretend again. Why are you here? It was not a question the way he said it. It was a stone drop down a well to hear how deep the dark went. Because I was hungry, she said, and the advertisement did not say your name. I did not come here for you, Julian. I would not have come within 40 miles of you if I had known. Believe that, at least, if you'll believe nothing else of me.
She had not meant to use his name. It came out of her like blood out of a reopened cut. The first time in 11 years she had said it aloud. And she saw it land. Saw the still water of his face break, just once, in a single ring spreading out, and knew that whatever this was, it would not be survivable the way she had planned. You have no right to that name, he said, low. No, she agreed. I gave it up. They made me give up everything else. I gave that up myself. She lifted her chin to the angle the painter had caught. Send me away, Your Grace. It will be the second time, and you are practiced at it. The blow landed, and the man who had let his father break her in a ballroom 11 years ago, who had not asked one question then, asked one now, very quietly, as if the asking cost him his last coin. Did you do it? And there it was, the question that had been owed her for 11 years, arriving in an empty hall, from a man who no longer had the power to give her back a single thing it had taken. She could have wept. Instead, she felt something in her go cold and clear and very old. You'll keep me on as Henry's governess, she said. You'll tell no one who I am. And one day, Julian, when I am ready and not before, I will answer that question and make you wish to God you had asked it the night you let them take the letter out of my hands. Those are my terms. Refuse them, and I am gone by morning, and you may ask the painting instead. It was the first time in 11 years she had held anything over anyone. She watched him understand that she was not the girl in the picture, that the girl in the picture had died in a ballroom and something harder had walked out of it. And she watched him, proud and ducal and untouched-faced, agree. Stay, he said. So she stayed. And the house now had two cold people who could not stop watching each other. He began coming to the nursery. Mrs. Pell noted it with her eyebrows and said nothing. He told himself he came for the boy. 3 years he had not crossed that threshold, and now he crossed it daily. To sit in a low chair too small for him, while the governess corrected Henry's Latin in a voice that had once said his name like a benediction, and now said nothing to him that was not about the boy. She gave him nothing. She was scrupulous and distant and perfectly correct, and it was driving him slowly out of his mind. And they both knew it, and neither of them stopped it. The thing he could not stop noticing was her hands. When she was thinking, she turned her mother's ring, a thin, worn band, all she had left, round and round her finger with her thumb, and did not know she did it. And he could not look away. He had once known every habit of those hands and thought the knowledge gone. It came back like a language a man has not spoken since childhood, every gesture arriving whole. And he sat in the too small chair and was 11 years younger and ruined by it. You're staring, Your Grace, she said one afternoon, not looking up from Henry's sums. I am wondering, he said, what you've done with the last 11 years. Survived them. She set down the pen. Which is more than was wished for me by most of your acquaintance. I have been a seamstress and a companion to a deaf old woman, and for one bad winter, something I will not name in front of the child. I buried both my parents, my father in a borrowed coat because his own had been sold. Sir Reginald Crane bought our land the year my father died, the whole of Ashworth, house and farms and the church my grandmother lies beside, for £4,000, because no one would bid against a man who'd had the family ruined for sport. She was not raising her voice. Henry had gone very quiet over his sums. That is what I've done with 11 years.
What have you done with yours?
Married a woman I did not love, he said, because my father chose her, and buried her, and made a son, and kept a painting I should have burned. It came out of him flat and terrible, and entirely honest, the cruelest true thing either of them had said, and it left a small wound in the room neither could afterward pretend not to have seen. Henry looked between them with his clever face and understood, the way children understand weather, that something had changed and that he must not ask. After that, they could not go back to being only the Duke and the Governess. They had seen each other.
Sir Reginald Crane came to Hartfell on a Tuesday in May, as a neighbour come to dine, and Marianne knew his horse in the courtyard before she knew his face, because some sounds you do not forget. She stood very still at the nursery window, with both hands flat on the cold sill, deciding whether to run. She did not run. She sent Henry down to Mrs. Pell, smoothed her grey skirt, and went, against every instinct of self-preservation, to the gallery above the great hall, where she could see without being seen, and watched 11 years of her life walk in out of the spring evening in a bottle-green coat. Ruin had agreed with him. He had spent her family's blood, and it had fattened him. He laughed at something the Duke said, and it was the same laugh, and her hands on the gallery rail went bloodless, and she understood with a calm that frightened her that the only thing staying her hand was that she had a better weapon than her hands, and had carried it 11 years. He saw her. Of course he saw her. He was a man who counted every face in a room, because he had made enemies in most of them, and his eyes came up to the gallery and found her, and for one instant the prosperous mask dropped clean off, and she watched Reginald Crane be afraid. Then he smiled, and lifted his glass to her a half-inch, where no one else could see, and she knew the dinner was now a duel. He found her after, in the corridor outside the dining room, the way men like him always found women alone. "Lady Marianne," he said, savouring it. "Or is it Miss Brooke this season? How far the great have fallen. Governess in the house of the man who threw you over. There's a kind of justice in it I can almost taste." "There is a kind of justice coming," she said, "that you will not taste at all, until it is in your throat." His smile thinned. "You've nothing, girl. One word from me to Hartfell, about what you really are, and you are in the road, and I am believed, because I am a baronet of 1800 a year, and you are a woman who paints her past over like a brass plate. Be gone from this house by Sunday, or I will make certain what little is left of you is taken too. You of all women know how good I am at it." That was his first move, and it very nearly worked, because it was true. He was believed, and she was not, and she had no standing in this house but a duke's reluctant sufferance. She stood in the corridor after he had gone and shook, not with fear, but with the old helplessness, the 11-year-old certainty that no proof in the world matters when the world has already decided whose word is good. And then the Duke came out of the dining room and found her shaking, and crossed the corridor in 3 strides, and did not touch her, though she saw it cost him not to. "What did he say to you?" he said, and his voice had murder in it too, and that, the sound of someone's anger spent on her behalf, after 11 years of everyone spent against her, undid her more than Crane had. "Nothing I have not heard," she said. "Go back to your guest, your grace. Marianne," just her name, the first time since the hall. "Don't." She stepped back from him, and from the warmth of him, which she remembered, which was the worst of it. "You don't get to say it kindly now. You had the saying of it kindly 11 years ago, and you spent it. Go in to dinner. Smile at him. He bought my father's grave for £4,000, and you will pass him the wine. Because that is what your world does, and I am so tired of your world. She left him standing there, and she did not see, Mrs. Pell told her later, who saw everything, that the Duke went back into that dining room and was so cold to Sir Reginald Crane for the rest of the evening that the baronet left before the cloth was drawn, white about the mouth, knowing he had an enemy, and not yet knowing how large. She found Julian that night in the great hall, alone, before the portrait, a single candle in his hand. She had come down for water and stopped on the stair. He had heard her, and neither of them moved. I never believed it, he said to the painting, not turning. Whatever else I was, a coward, a boy who did as his father bid, I never once believed you went to another man. I knew that face. He lifted the candle a little, and the painted girl glowed. My father had the letter. He said the family could not weather a public defense, that to fight it was to drown in it, that the only thing was to let the betrothal lapse quietly and let you go. And I was 24 and had never once disobeyed him, and I let them take the letter out of your hands and watched your face when you understood I would not fight for you, and I have seen that face every night for 11 years. It is why the painting still hangs. I keep it so I will not be permitted to forget what I am. She came down the last stairs and stood beside him before the picture, close enough to feel the heat of the candle, and felt, for the first time in 11 years, something other than rage toward the man beside her. The letter was a forgery, she said quietly. Never in my hand or any lover's hand. It was written to destroy me by a man who could not have me, and I have spent 11 years carrying the proof of it, Julian, and not one soul to show it to who would believe a fallen woman over a baronet. She turned and looked up at him, and he turned and looked down at her, and the candle shook in his hand. Until perhaps tonight. Show me, he breathed. God, Marianne, show me, and I will burn his world to the foundation stones. Not yet. Her hand came up, she did not decide it, and rested flat against his chest, over the place where his heart was going like a struck bell, and they both stopped breathing. An inch. There was an inch of air left, and 11 years of pressure behind it, and his free hand rose to her face, and his head bent, and the candle tipped, and a drop of hot wax fell hissing to the stone, and a small voice from the gallery said, "Papa? Miss Brooke? Why are you awake?" They came apart like two halves of something breaking. Henry stood at the rail in his nightshirt, owl-eyed, and the moment was gone, the inch restored to a yard, and Marianne stepped back with her hand burning where it had touched him and said, in a voice scraped almost level, "Bad dreams, all of us, it seems. Come." And she took the boy to bed, and did not look back at the man standing alone in the ruin of the candlelight, because if she had looked back she would not have been able to leave him, and she was not yet ready to be unable to leave him. She lay awake the rest of that night with her hand still warm. Downstairs, she would learn, the Duke did not sleep either. He sat at his desk until dawn and wrote 3 letters, to his solicitor in London, to a magistrate he trusted, and to a man who had served under Crane's late father and bore the family a grudge, and did not send them, because he did not yet have the proof in his hand, but wrote them, so that when the proof came there would be no hour's delay. It was the first decisive thing he had done for her in 11 years, and she did not know he had done it. He meant her never to know. He had decided, somewhere in that long night, to spend the rest of his life doing things for her she would never be told of, as penance, whether or not she ever let him near her again. It was Marianne who forced the matter 3 days later, and she forced it in front of a witness, which made it irreversible, which was the point. Crane came back, with a magistrate a soft, comfortable man named Pugh who owed him money, and a constable, and a story 11 years old and freshly dressed, that the Ashworth jewels, vanished the winter of the scandal, had been taken by the disgraced daughter, who was now living under a false name in the Duke of Hartfell's house, within reach of his Grace's plate and his Grace's son, and that a man of conscience could not in decency stay silent. It was his second move, and very nearly his masterpiece, because a charge of theft, however old, would let him take her out of that house in irons before the Duke's London solicitor could be roused, and ruin is so much easier to finish than to begin. They assembled in the great hall, beneath the portrait, because Crane had a sense of theatre and wanted her tried beneath her own young face. Servants gathered at the edges. Mrs. Pell stood by the stair, her hand pressed white to her mouth. The Duke stood very still and said nothing, and Marianne saw the stillness and understood, this time, what it was. Not surrender, never again surrender, but a man holding something down with all his strength, waiting. "Lady Marianne Ashworth," said the magistrate unhappily, "you are charged." "Stop." She stepped forward into the center of the hall, under the painting, and she was not the girl in the painting, and everyone in that room could see it. "Your Grace." She turned to Julian. "Stop. Not for my sake. Do not protect me. Do not speak for me. Do not lift one ducal finger. You are not the one who can give me back what was taken, and not the one who must answer for it. He is." She turned back. "Tell me what you intend to do, Sir Reginald, in front of all these people, and then I will tell them what you did." And she reached into the bodice of her grey dress and drew out a letter 11 years old, soft as cloth at the folds, sealed once with a signet she now held up to the candlelight for the whole hall to see. "This is your hand, Sir Reginald. Your seal. Written to me 3 days before the jewels you speak of ever went missing." She read it out, and her voice did not shake, and the words fell into the silent hall like stones into a well. "You will be my wife by Michaelmas, or you will be no one's wife at all. I have the means to make certain of it. Do not try me. You wrote this." And 3 days later, a letter appeared in another hand, a lover's hand, they said, that no one ever let me touch or test or answer. Your Grace held that letter 11 years ago. You have, I think, a long memory for hands. "I have," said the Duke of Hartfell, and crossed the hall and took the 11-year-old letter from her fingers as gently as if it were the girl herself, and looked at it, and looked up, and his still face at last broke open. "It is the same hand. The forgery that ended my betrothal and the threat in this letter were written by the same man. I will swear to it before any court in England." He turned to the wretched magistrate. "Mr. Pugh, you came to arrest a thief. There is a forger in the room, and a man who has just before a dozen witnesses been shown to have manufactured the ruin of an innocent woman and bought her family's land off the back of it. Think very carefully, sir, about whose debts you choose to be seen paying." It came apart for Crane all at once, the magistrate stepping backward, the servant's silence turning from fear to something hungrier, and the baronet, cornered, did the last stupid thing of a man who has always been believed. He lunged for the letter in the Duke's hand. He never reached it. Marianne stepped between, and she did not flinch. She had stopped flinching long ago, and said into his face the thing she had carried 11 years to say. "You took everything I had, and I kept one thing back, and it was you. I have had you in my pocket for 11 years, Reginald. Every cold night, every borrowed coat. I knew that one day you would walk into a room arrogant enough to think it was safe, and find me already in it." She stepped back. "Mr. Pugh, do your office. You came for a thief. You have found one." They took him out beneath the painting of the girl he had broken, and the girl was gone. There was only the woman, standing in the wreck of his theatre, breathing hard, alive. The hall emptied of constable and magistrate and white-faced baronet and, by Mrs. Pell's quiet herding, of servants, until there was only Marianne and Julian and a painting and 11 years finally set down. He did not cross to her at once. He stood where he was, the letter still in his hand. I should have asked. The night they took it from you. There is no letter you can show that absolves me of that. I am the one thing in this room that cannot be cleared. No, she agreed. You can't be. And she crossed to him because she found she was the one who could move. She had always been the one who could move. But I am 11 years tired, Julian, and I find I would rather spend what's left being loved badly by a man who knows exactly what he failed to do, than spend it being right and alone in a borrowed coat. She took the letter from his hand and folded it and put it back over her heart, where it had lived so long it had left a mark. Ask me now. You're 11 years late. Ask me anyway. Did you do it? He said, the same 5 words, and this time they meant the opposite of doubt. No, she said. Marry me, he said. And the man whose face never broke entirely, and she reached up and took it in both her hands, those hands he could not stop watching, and she kissed him, under the painting, in the warm and ruined hall, 11 years too late and exactly on time. And it was not gentle, and it was not careful, and it had the whole weight of 2 lives behind it. And when she finally drew back, his arms had closed around her as though he had been falling his whole life and had only just been caught. That was not an answer, he said against her hair. Unsteady, it was yes, she said. It has been yes since a hall full of people watched you not fight for me, and I hated that it was still yes, and now I do not have to hate it any longer. She felt him laugh, a broken, astonished thing, and thought she had perhaps never given anyone so large a gift, and had given it to the one man who had cost her everything, and found she did not mind. They were married in the autumn, quietly, in the small church beside which her grandmother lay, for the Duke had bought back the whole of Ashworth from the Crown's receivers within the month, and put it in her own true name, restored to the parish register and to her. Sir Reginald Crane was tried at the Derby Assizes for forgery, convicted on the evidence of 2 hands that matched, and a duke who swore to it, stripped of what he had stolen, and transported for 14 years. He sailed in November, and the sea took the rest of his story out of theirs, which was all the ending he was owed. A year after the wedding, on a bright cold morning, Marianne came into the great hall and found Henry standing before the portrait again, hands folded behind his back, and beside it now hung a second painting, newer, the paint scarcely dry, the same woman, older, in a gown the color of autumn, one hand resting not on a book, but on the shoulder of a grave, clever boy, and below it a brass plate, with a name on it that no one would ever unscrew again. That lady has your eyes, Henry informed her, with the enormous patience of a child explaining the obvious twice in one life. She does, Marianne agreed, and put her hand on his shoulder where the painter had put it. She's done a great deal of explaining who she is. I think she's finished now. Good, said Henry, satisfied, and went to find his beetles. The Duke came and stood beside her, as he did every morning now, in the warm hall of the house that had once kept its fires burning for the dead, and now kept them for the living. And he took her hand, the one with her mother's worn ring still on it, which she had refused to give up even for a duchess's diamonds, and pressed his thumb once. Gently, to her knuckles, the old habit turned tender, a man no longer holding anything down. You kept the letter 11 years, he said. I never asked what it cost to keep it and never use it. Everything, she said, and it bought me this morning. She looked up at the 2 paintings, the girl who had trusted the world and the woman who had walked back into it on her own terms and made it answer. I would pay it again. But I should very much prefer not to have to. You won't, he said, have to. And for once in his life, the Duke of Hartfell made a promise he was entirely able to keep, and kept it every ordinary morning for the rest of their long and wholly extraordinary lives.